Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously fascinating set of source materials. We're talking about bridging ancient philosophy with modern economics. We're going to look at how a centuries-old spiritual practice actually offers a surprisingly structured solution to literally one of today's most pressing global issues, wealth distribution. Okay, let's dive into this.
Take a look at this number right here, 0.381. According to the data in our sources, this is Indonesia's Gini coefficient as of September 2024. Now, for those of you who might need a super quick refresher, the Gini coefficient measures economic inequality. Basically, the higher the number, the worse the inequality is. So what this 0.381 represents is a critical structural problem. It tells us that despite overall economic growth, the whole pie getting bigger, that growth is failing to create equitable welfare. The wealth is just pooling up at the top, while the bottom is seeing practically zero improvement.
And the sources we're analyzing today point out a pretty stark reality about this. The modern capitalist system is, it's structurally flawed when it comes to distribution, because it prioritizes absolute individual ownership and this kind of relentless capital accumulation. It inevitably exacerbates inequality. It just locks a built-in mechanism to stop wealth from concentrating in the hands of a very small few. So if the current system is failing to distribute wealth fairly, where on earth do we look for an alternative framework?
Well, that brings us to our roadmap for today. Here is what we'll be covering. 1. Economic inequality and its solution. 2. The basic meaning and rules of Zakat. 3. Zakat as self-purification. 4. Building human social harmony. 5. Distributive justice and wasatiyah. And finally, 6. Transformation towards shared prosperity.
So, jumping right into Section 1, Economic Inequality and its Solution. How exactly do we solve this massive systemic inequality issue using an ancient, faith-based economic philosophy? It all begins with a total paradigm shift in how we actually view property. First, you've got the liberal capitalist view, right? You earn it, you own it absolutely, and the ultimate goal is just to accumulate more of it. But in stark contrast, the Islamic economic philosophy introduces a radically different concept called amana. Amana roughly translates to a divine trust. In this worldview, you don't absolutely own your wealth. Instead, you're basically managing it on behalf of God. And because it's a trust, it has to be managed fairly, productively, and crucially with a focus on public welfare. Your wealth literally has a social function built right into it.
Section 2. The basic meaning and rules of Zakat. Let's move to and see how this builds into a practical, highly structured mechanism, because Islam doesn't just leave this divine trust thing as a nice, abstract philosophical idea, it actually enforces it through Zakat.
Now, to really understand Zakat, we need to define a couple of baseline terms from the source texts. The first one is nishab. This is the minimum threshold of wealth. Basically, if your assets fall below this line, you don't pay a dime. In fact, you might even be eligible to receive. This ensures that this wealth distribution mechanism never taxes the poor. It only activates once a person has reached a verified solid level of financial stability.
The second key term here is hal. This is all about the time factor. You see, you don't pay Zakat the second you earn $1. The wealth has to be held stably for one full lunar year. And this is actually brilliant because it protects people from being taxed on, say, temporary cash flow or money they might immediately need just to survive. It strictly targets stagnant, accumulated capital.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this system logically adapts to totally different types of wealth. For hoarded gold or idle cash, the rate is 2.5%. But if you own a herd of, say, 40 to 120 goats, you give one goat. And look at agriculture at the bottom. This is fascinating. If your crops are naturally watered by rain, the rate is 10%. But if you have to pay for irrigation and put in extra physical labor, the rate drops to 5%. The system dynamically adjusts your tax burden based on the actual amount of human effort and capital required to produce that wealth.
Moving on to Section 3, Zakat as self-purification. You see, Zakat is not just some ancient tax code. If we actually look at the root of the word itself, it reveals a really profound psychological dimension. Let's zoom into the micro level of the individual.
The sources emphasize that Zakat executes this kind of dual action on the human mind, described by two Arabic concepts, tathir and tazkiyah. Tathir is essentially the act of subtraction. It cleanses the soul of the negative, destructive traits, things like greed, miserliness, and that obsessive love of material stuff. Tazkiyah, on the flip side, is about addition. It purifies and actually grows the positive qualities of the soul. It cultivates a mindset of abundance and generosity. Basically, it breaks the psychological chains of hoarding. Section 4. Building human social harmony. But how does purifying one's own soul actually fix a broken economy? I mean, how do we bridge the gap between inner peace and external equality?
Well, the texts lay out these 6 wisdoms of Zakat to explain exactly how that progression works. It starts internally, right, as a proof of faith and an exercise in gratitude. But true gratitude organically transforms into action. It becomes a bridge of compassion, leading you to actively go out and help the needy. Think about it. When the wealthy are structurally obligated to support the vulnerable, it naturally erodes envy and resentment. It builds social harmony. The rich don't despise the poor, and the poor don't resent the rich. And that prevents the exact kind of social friction that destabilizes so many modern economies today.
Section 5. Distributive justice and wasatiyah. So let's zoom back out to the macro level for a second. The real genius of this framework lies in how it perfectly balances 2 relationships, what the texts call hablam min Allah, which is the vertical relationship with the divine, and hablam min nas, the horizontal relationship with humanity.
This delicate balance is perfectly encapsulated in a vital concept called wasatiyah. It loosely translates to the middle path, or moderation. Wasatiyah is the ultimate framework because it outright rejects economic extremes. On one hand, it rejects the absolute, unrestricted hoarding of extreme capitalism, but on the other hand, it also rejects the complete abolition of private property that you'd see in extreme socialism. It completely validates your right to own what you earn, but, and this is the key, it mandates social solidarity as a non-negotiable condition of that ownership.
And this brilliantly illustrates how classical wisdom addresses our modern crises. This concept, heavily inspired by the classical scholar Al-Ghazali, highlights that an economy is kind of like a human body, and wealth is the blood. If blood just pools in one area, the body gets sick, right? Preventing wealth from concentrating among the minority requires the active, continuous flow of capital. In this analogy, Zakat acts as the heart, just constantly pumping resources back into the wider system so the entire society can thrive.
Section 6. Transformation toward shared prosperity. So the crucial point is that Zakat is far, far more than just personal charity. It is a highly active, deeply structural tool engineered for distributive justice, or what the texts call adl. When we connect all the dots from our sources, we see a really clear, step-by-step mechanism for transformation. Step 1 happens inside the individual, breaking down greed through spiritual purification. Then, Step 2 ripples outward into the community, as that purification fosters tangible compassion and real social harmony. And finally, Step 3 hits the macro level. The systemic, continuous redistribution of idle wealth actively lowers that exact Gini coefficient we talked about at the very beginning, achieving true macroeconomic distributive justice.
Which leaves us with a pretty powerful final thought to reflect on today. The frameworks we've explored really challenge the very foundation of how our modern world operates. I mean, the numbers clearly show that endless accumulation is failing us as a broader society. So as you look at your own financial footprint, ask yourself, will we continue to view wealth merely as a prize to be hoarded, or will we start seeing it as a trust meant to be distributed? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a fresh, powerful new lens through which to view economics and equity.